Greetings and welcome to the Upper Pen Podcast. My name is Dakota, and today I'm talking with Travis Baldree about his book, Legends and Lattes. The book follows Viv, an orc who wants out of the adventuring life, so she sets up a coffee shop. Only one problem: no one knows what coffee is. This book is as addicting as the bean water that Viv sells and is as sweet as a cinnamon roll. Legends and Lattes is a slice of life with a hint of romance and lots of friendship. Thank you, Travis, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So how did you get started on Legends and Lattes?
Well, I've done a lot of NaNoWriMos in the past. So this is a NaNoWriMo book. This is my first win of NaNoWriMo. So I have a legion of failed NaNoWriMos behind me. And a friend of mine who's also a narrator, Avon Shore, convinced me to try it again. And we both did it together. We were Nano buddies, and we both finished. So this is the result. The idea came before Nano. So I'm a narrator, which may not be obvious, but I do a lot of action adventure fiction with really, really high stakes, and usually some guy between the ages of like 16 and 24 fighting some world-ending threat or something like that, which is cool and fun, but I do a lot of that. So I was kind of joking around with like, I really need like the Hallmark movie in the Forgotten Realms kind of vibe, which was kind of the genesis of the idea. And it just sort of percolated for a while. I didn't mean that as a pun, but I guess it is. And so that was what I chose to do during Nano.
Okay. So one of the other authors I spoke to said that she actually got her start during NaNoWriMo too. Only her first book from that will never be published. It's so bad.
It helps that this was a simple book. It was, it's not a really complicated book. I think all my other nanos were very complicated. They were very ambitious. They had to be like, if I'm going to write a book, it's got to be the end all be all, which was a terrible idea in retrospect. So I finally chose to do something simple.
And it worked. It worked so wonderful.
It was kind of what I needed at the time. The world has been, kind of on fire for a couple of years now. So I just wanted something that didn't stress me out to participate in.
Well, Viv is really helpful with that. She's very good at low key, even though she stresses about a lot of little things.
It is a pretty low key book, but I did like it. I liked doing it. I enjoyed doing it. I mean, there's just the grind of like, oh no, I need to get my words today. But overall, it was pretty pleasant. And, then afterward, I just decided, well, I work with authors all the time who are indie, who do self-publishing. And I thought, well, I just want to know how that works. So I guess I'll publish it. And so I just went through the process and learned everything I could and did the publishing, mostly to figure out how it worked. And then I was surprised that anybody wanted to read it. So.
It was so good, though. So a lot of people want to read it, I'm betting.
I mean, many more than I expected. And that cover was great. So.
Oh my God, yeah.
The cover landed. Anyway, it's been a really pleasant experience. It's been really unexpected and really nice. And the nice thing is because it's a book about people mostly being nice, and it's a friendly book, and it's about people who are like coming together and building their relationships in various different ways, and kind of sorting out community. The feedback you get is also kind of along those lines, so it's like kind of reflective, which has been also really nice because I could use a little of that. So it's been very, very pleasant and touching in a lot of ways that I didn't expect it would be.
So tell me about Viv and how she got started.
I wanted to have like this dramatic difference between what someone did and what they wanted to do. So, and I didn't want it to be standard. I didn't want the characters that I always am narrating for. I wanted somebody totally different. And so it should just be an orc lady barbarian. That's what it should be. And also because by nature, it makes it even more unexpected that she does something different, because the orcs are just your fantasy stereotypical baddie or bestial or whatever. And so having something that was even more of a contrast appealed to me. And the whole book ended up being about people who were not wanting to be what it's assumed they would be. It just kind of happened that way. Everybody ended up wanting to not be what they would have been taken at face value as being.
I think the moment when Viv and Tandri meet is a really good example of that.
Yeah, yeah. And originally, no, Tandri was always gonna be a succubus, and she was always gonna wear a sweater. And that was my like, I'm not that. I'm not. This is what I was born as, but I don't have to be that thing for her. Their relationship ended up being different than I expected it would. I thought they were going to become good friends, and it went a little further than that. But that was just the way their relationship went. It wasn't like a U-turn for the narrative. It was just that's the way it developed and the way that felt right. So
it did feel very natural, and nothing seemed surprising, I guess. So
it feels kind of slightly like an inevitable sort of book. I don't know. I mean, like maybe the surprises are just how something specifically manifests, but I don't know.
So I guess the most surprising part of this for me was why a coffee shop?
I like coffee. I miss coffee shops right now, going into a coffee shop and hanging out and that experience of seeing people in the community that you get to know over time and all the little things that go along with a coffee shop, the coffee shop cat, the baristas that you get to know, the not particularly good music students from the local university who play in the evenings, all those little things. I have a lot of affection for that. And again, it just felt like something that I wanted to do, something that wasn't edgy, but also was all things that you wouldn't expect if I could. So an orc opening a coffee shop is just like, it's an easy thing to say. And people are like, oh, that's the orc coffee shop book. That's it holds it all together, I guess.
I liked that it wasn't a bar just because it feels like that probably would have been more like her old life.
Yeah, it feels like this takes it further. This is totally different realm. It's a totally different expectations.
Yeah.
And it helps that it was also something that you don't ever hear about. So it could be something that people weren't familiar with. So if you opened a bar, everybody would know what that was. But if you open a coffee shop, I have the potential to set that up as something unknown, but also that's relatable and kind of cozy. So if I wanted it to be something that was welcoming and that I had like a fond association with, but that wouldn't exist in a fantasy world, then that felt like the thing that's just sort of how it worked out.
I thought it was funny that the only people who knew about the coffee to begin with were dwarves.
They're all
right?
gnomes. The gnomes are the only ones that do it. And I figured that the gnomes are basically just ahead of the curve on everything. They're just like, they're about 100 years in the future from everybody else. And everybody else is just sort of like catching up in their wake all the time. But they've got, kind of their own cities and their own thing. And they interact with everybody else, but they're just sort of like, they've evolved too much past everybody else. Everybody else can't immediately get it. They have to catch up.
I thought it was very great. And then the random gnome that comes and visits the coffee shop.
Yeah, he's got to show up later. I wanted to have like at least some characters that hinted that, there's more to the world. There's more out there. I don't really like really dense world building because I read a lot of it and it's like 2 pages of like rugs and, why the magic system works the way the magic system works. And that's fine. And lots of people like that. But when you get it in big chunks, I'm kind of like, so I appreciate like the lightly sketched world building that kind of layers over time. So he's kind of like a little thread of that theoretically.
Well, so it seemed like the world is just building on expectations that we have anyway, and then you're breaking those expectations. So did you start off with any kind of specific fantasy world in mind, or did you just kind of
It's really kind of an amalgam, It's a little Forgotten Realms. It's a little it's a little D&D. It's a little bit, Tolkien. It's a little bit Discworld. It's a little bit this and that and the other. I wanted this stuff to be mostly recognizable with the idea that it could be like Hobbs. There's gremlins and trolls and whatever, but it's just this very slight, quarter turn to the left from something else, but it's still recognizable. I think the main thing that's different is that the world feels like it has a modern sensibility set in a fantasy setting for the most part, which to me is very Discworld.
Yes.
I wasn't thinking that at the time. It's just what I wanted because it went well with coffee and having modern attitudes toward things. I didn't want to do, I didn't even want people to really have like the orc bad. I didn't want to have a lot of conflict between races or wars or all these fantasy conflicts that are standard. I wanted them to feel like these are people that I could relate to. They're just in this fantastical setting so that I can do other stuff. So I read a lot of progression fantasy and game lit these days. And one of the advantages of it is that you're taking people and isekai. So people are taking modern sensibilities and they put it in a fantasy setting, which is attractive. You get to do neat things with that. I just wanted to do it without any of that other stuff. I didn't want the isekai and I didn't want the game lit. I just wanted modern sensibilities with this fantasy setting. And then after I wrote it and someone mentioned it to me, I was like, oh well, that's very Terry Pratchett, isn't it? It's very Discworld. And honestly, that's the way I kind of want to write these. I don't write anything like Terry Pratchett, I don't think, and I'm not trying to ape Terry Pratchett, but I like the fact that he chooses like a topic that he's interested in and he finds a way to talk about it in a story. And you can kind of read them all out of order, but if you read a bunch of them, that starts to build and it stacks up and you have this bigger, greater sense of Discworld and Ankh-Morpork and the characters in it. So I like that kind of storytelling. So that's kind of my aim.
I think you did it so good because now I just want more stories in this world that are kind of building up what is happening, where they are, what they're doing, who the different people are that populate it.
Yeah, that's my goal. So I know what the next one is. I'm hoping to start outlining it shortly, but it's different main characters and it's more cozy mystery. But set again in the same kind of place. And some of the other characters may recur or intersect, but it won't be about them because it's about a different thing. It's about a different idea. One of the reasons I'm just going to keep rambling. Sorry, you can interrupt me.
That's okay.
One of the reasons I think I managed to get through the book was because the basic idea was like personally relatable to me. It was about, you don't have to do what you always did. And I did that. That's been a thing that's been on my mind a lot. I used to make video games. I did it for decades. Got to a point where I didn't want to do it anymore. And I switched jobs and it's kind of scary. But it ended up being the right thing to do. And I was so much happier after I had done it. But it seemed impossible while you're doing the thing that you've spent all your life learning how to do. I put all this, it's that sunken cost fallacy where I put all this energy into being what I am. And am I just going to waste it by doing something else? Is that stupid? So there was that. And again, just this need to connect with other people and talk to other people and have a somewhat normal life. And so that was kind of what into it. And so for the next one, it's going to have to be kind of like some probably not really complicated or really groundbreaking personal thought, but that has to be the root of it. Otherwise, I don't think I'll make it through.
Well, so the thing that I loved about this was just everybody's figuring it out. It's so relatable. Like she's an orc, but I don't care. Like her situation is relatable.
I had something that was really unexpected. It was a guy who he had retired from the military, and he was like, I was really related to this book because I'm coming back and I've got to put together a life right now, yeah. Which was really unexpected to me. But it was like, it's amazing how the common experience happens in really, really different ways for totally different reasons.
Yeah. You talked about how you've been a narrator for these other books for a while now, actually. Mm-hmm. You've been doing them, and you do so many of them.
I do a lot of books.
Yeah, you do. Has being a narrator for like Will White and Dakota Kraut books kind of shaped how you would have written this or told you, like, I don't want to go that way?
I learned a lot from narrating books. I think I learned a lot more than I thought I learned because, well, for a couple of reasons. Because you read a wide variety of stuff at various degrees of quality.
Yeah.
And the rougher books are the most work because you're identifying what they want to do and trying to get them there. and you can't help but see shortcomings as people are learning to write, or it's their first book or whatever, and you're kind of absorbing all of these lessons like really, really fast, and you can't skim. So if we read a book that has like slow parts or sloggy bits or stuff that you don't particularly like, and you're reading it, you just skip it. You just sort of skim by. You can't do that. So it makes it stand out what you like and what you don't like even more while you're reading it out loud, because you must consume it and you must try and do it justice. So you have to get on board with what they're trying to do. So I don't know if I'm sure to a certain extent it's teaching better writing, because you're learning things that just don't work. For the same reason, when people proof books, they proof them out loud and you find all kinds of problems. I'm basically proofing, how many books a year? I don't know, 80 something books a year out loud. And that's a lot to learn. But also it kind of like refines my taste for what I like and what I don't like, because not everybody likes the same thing. I know what I like now, which is brisk, kind of modern sort of delivery where you get to it pretty quick. There's not a lot of futzing around and noodling in the margins. I'm fine to fill that in with my brain. And so it refined my taste, I guess, for what I want and what I want to do.
Okay. Do you think you're going to be a little bit more discerning about whose audiobooks you take on, or what audiobooks you take on?
I mean, I take pretty much anything that will fit on the schedule, and I think it's still, even if the book has its challenges, part of the reward of the job is taking a book and kind of leveling it up if you can, and helping it connect with people it might not connect with if it was only in text, which is pretty cool when you think about it, but it's hard work. By and large, though, it's hard for me to filter much because most of the books on my schedule haven't even been written. So I can't even look at them and say, hey, no, I don't want to read that. I have no idea what the book is. I know vaguely how long it's targeted at and maybe the title. Oftentimes, I don't even know the title.
Is it usually with authors that you've been working with for a while, so you at least know their style?
It's both. It's both. I have lots of new authors that are on the schedule that I've never read one of their books before in my life. Or maybe it's their first book and they're still writing it. So it's a big mix. It's a real big mix.
So you actually narrated the audiobook for Legends and Lattes. Did you find it hard to do your own book, or were you like, no, I know these people?
Easiest narration I've ever done. Easiest, breeziest narration I've ever done. Partially because when I wrote it, I'm basically narrating it in my head, because I'm just kind of used to doing that. But also, so when you read audiobooks, at least for me, it's like 50% anticipation. You're reading a sentence and you're kind of scanning ahead with your eyes, but it's not 100%. So a lot of it is anticipating where a sentence is going to go. Where's the inflection going to go? How is this sentence going to bend? Where are they going to end? How are these words going to be transposed? And so the closer I am in my brain to the thought process of the author, the closer it is to something that I would have written, the easier it is to read. And the further away it is, the harder it is, which is why translated novels are usually trickier to read. You tend to stop more because the sentence just doesn't go where you expect it will go. So this is like the ideal situation. I know where every sentence is going to go because of what I would write, because I wrote it. So it was incredibly easy to do. It was really pleasant.
Did you ever find yourself like editing your book while you were narrating it? Like, I should have done this.
We did 2 or 3 edits, short edits. One of them was just like a formatting edit. One of them found a small continuity error that we fixed. And maybe one other, but we did a pretty rigorous edit on it beforehand. So it was pretty edited by the time it got to audio, but it was nice to have that last sanity check.
So how do you break down recording a book, even Legends and Lattes? Do you sit down and read the whole book and then you get the voices? Like Viv and Tandri have distinct personalities and voices in the book.
Yeah, and I know how they sound in my head, so I don't spend much time developing voices. I kind of have like a slate of voice actors in my brain that can play different characters. So they don't all sound the same playing different characters. It's like a baseline parts of the voice that help me like bookmark them in my brain. Generally with books, I do a really quick skim read and I have certain searches that I do in Word to look for, especially since I do fantasy, I look for misspellings because that finds all the made up words. And then I cull all the made up words and I will write down what I think the pronunciations are and I'll check them with the author if I think they're contentious or they could go a couple different ways. Sometimes they're just obvious. There's only one way to say them. And I'll make sure I know who the main characters are and important things like he has an Irish accent. I found out on page 572 or something so that I don't make an ass of myself by not knowing what's happening. But I don't deep read the books at all. I like to be surprised and enjoy them while I read them. So I just find the things that I have to know and get them out, and then I just cold read the book is basically how it works. And I usually aim for 2.5 to 3 finished hours of audio a day, which usually takes me about 5 hours. It really depends on the book.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll go more, sometimes I'll go less if I'm tired or if the book's exceptionally hard. Every book is a little bit different. And yeah, I just do it until I'm done.
So Legends and Lattes is a pretty straight up story. Did you find yourself adding little things like the, oh God, I can't remember her name, the woman who
Across the
gets
street,
the roles for free?
Lainey. Oh
Yeah.
no, the Madrigal.
Yeah, the Madrigal. Did you find yourself adding people like that to kind of add more nuance, or?
I knew she had to be there, and I knew mostly who she was. Some of them kind of firmed up in the outline. This is the first book I ever outlined. All my others I tried to pants, which was clearly a failure. So this is the first one I outlined, and it's really pretty close to the outline. The main things that got added were little scenes after the fact that just needed just a tiny bit more. Just needed another scene with this character. You know, they needed to spend a little more time together. So and so needed to recur a little bit. But the through line and most of the bones of it were all there at the beginning, at least during the outline. I kind of figured out things that were missing during the outline. So the main challenge was I wanted to write a book where nobody died or got hurt during the entire book, if I could. Outside of the first line is like the closing of the previous book. So the Scalvert dies and she hits it with a sword, and that's the last time a sword is swung. And then the only other potential death happens outside the book.
Oh, yeah.
So nobody dies, nobody gets hurt. I mean, Viv gets a little hurt in the fire, but it's not, it's not like grievous wounds that are inflicted by another person. It's not.
It's more emotional.
Yeah, it's more emotional damage. I can play that sound now. So but then the challenge was, how do I make it interesting? What kind of action can I have? What kind of like compelling threat can I have? What kind of like looming problem can I have that isn't too dire so that it makes it impossible to relax and read this, but is also enough for you to have conflict to work against to move through the story. And I think it's kind of split between that and, family building is really what it amounts to, and like meeting people and being interested to meet them and hoping, I think mostly it's like, are the characters strong enough to support you caring about what they do? And is there just enough friction so that it feels like it's not too easy for them?
So I really loved that this wasn't an adventure story, but it's really a friendship story and like learning to belong.
Yeah.
Did you have all of those relationships? Well, it sounds like Tandri and Viv kind of evolved as you wrote.
They were going to be really good friends, and it just went a little further than that. But it was going to be centrally about their relationship, them kind of finding what they needed in partnership with each other and becoming good friends and, both backing each other up and challenging each other over the course of the book. And I kind of knew, the characters got more themselves the more I wrote them. So I knew they needed to exist. I knew that I was going to have the little rat man baker, and I knew his name was going to be Thimble, but that's all I knew. But their personalities get more themselves as I wrote them. I didn't know he was going to be that quiet, and I didn't know that was going to be a part of his personality, but it was. And I knew she was going to have somebody help her, and I knew it was going to probably be Cal, but I didn't know, the extent of what kind of person he was, and that kind of, they all sort of worked around each other, I guess. They just got more themselves.
That makes sense. It sounds like since you had already really done some good outlining. I couldn't remember that word for some reason. It seems like the characters fleshed themselves out when you were writing. Is that how it went?
They did. Once they're in the same room together and talking, it helps.
Yeah.
Because one person's personality seems to just expose something in the other one. Otherwise, they don't have anything to talk about. And so having ways for them to reveal something about themselves just in the course of conversation is what I want. Because I don't like needless exposition, and I don't like foodling around. So the more I can fold into them just interacting with each other, the better, which is nice because it also means that their conversations are easier to read, because they're hopefully interesting and they're not just info dumps. They're telling you something about the person. They're still not really long, though. I like them to be kind of snappy.
Yeah, it feels very much like contemporary literature. I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that, but it feels like contemporary literature that I would have read in school.
It's like reading. It's like watching comedies now versus comedies 20 years ago, and you watch the pacing, and it's so different. If you go watch an old comedy, it feels just like impossibly slow.
Yes.
And now, I don't know, we've optimized all of our the way that we consume information. I don't know if it's a reaction to phones and the internet or just the way that we all communicate now, but it feels like we've optimized all of our entertainment. And I don't know. Now it's maybe I'm just addicted to that kind of optimized entertainment. I don't know. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. My basic impatience.
Well, I still feel like this book went slow enough to enjoy, though. It was like slow enough to savor.
I kept worrying it needed to be longer. Kept because originally I was targeting like 75K words, and it ended up being like 62. And I got to the end, and I was like, maybe I should add something. I was like, no, that'll just be dumb.
This is like the perfect setup for your place, the Baldree world.
Yeah, it's a nice easy entry. The next one will have maybe slightly higher stakes, but not, I don't know. They're all going to be pretty, I think, personal stakes. It's never going to be like, I'm not going to write about a war or a cataclysm or a demon invading the planet or the destruction of a city. I'm just not interested. So.
Well, I'm down with wherever you're going to go with this because I loved this one. So.
I'm looking forward to starting the next one. It'll be really interesting. And then now. The funny thing is I have a sample size of 1. I've written 1 book now. Whoop-de-doo. Yeah. Now I don't know how to. Now I'm going to discover that the next one is going to take totally different things to get done, and is going to slip out of my fingers or something. But I'm hopeful that I can just do it.
Well, I'm willing to wait. For a while.
I don't think I have to wait that long. I'm gonna start on it pretty soon, and reasons are intersecting that mean it's probably going to happen sooner rather than later.
So something I try and talk about on this podcast is you weren't always a writer. This is your first book. Mm-hmm. And you've actually had 2 other careers now that you mentioned earlier, game developer and narrator.
Yep.
So how did you get into, I suppose writing came probably from narrating so much, but how did you get into narrating after developing games?
I did it part-time for a while I was making games because I liked it. And my kids didn't need me to read to them anymore. I got a lot of the equipment I needed so that I could record game VO without having to book studio time. And I stumbled across ACX, which is the service that Amazon Audible has up for indies to be able to put audiobooks up for audition. And I ended up doing some books, and I discovered that I really liked it. And so I kept doing it on the side. I do a book or 2 a month or whatever. And at some point when I was wrapping up the last game that I did, I was like, you know what? I've got enough books and people ask for me consistently enough that I could probably just do that full time. And so then I gave the people that work with me like a year advance warning, and I just slowly switched over and started doing it full time. And I think I've been full time for a little over 2 years now. And I just really like it. So, and I plan to continue doing it because it's really rewarding and enjoyable. I like to read. I get lots of books to read, and I kind of get the ideal version of books. because I can't skim. I'm a real skim reader. When I'm reading on, I put things down, I skim it, this way I can't. So it's like I have to get all the juice out, which is nice. Um, so yeah, that's how I ended up doing that. I wanted to be a writer when I was a kid. I wrote terrible, X number of chapters of novels when I was in high school and wrote short stories and did creative writing. And so I've always liked it, which is one of the reasons I like audiobook narration, because I like words, I like stories. But so, and I don't anticipate this taking over my life and being my job. I like doing audiobook narration. It's nice when somebody else does all the hard work and all I have to come in and try and make it sound cool. Writing stories is hard, a lot harder than narrating, I think.
Oh, I think that's up for debate. Narrating seems so hard. Like I've watched Jeff Hayes do his clips, and I'm like, oh, you work so much harder than I do.
There's different kinds of like labor, right? There's the labor where you have to pull the idea up out of the mud, and then there's just like chunking away at it and doing work that you already know how to do. So there's like discovering something and doing something that maybe is challenging, and they're really different. And so pulling the story up out of the mud, it feels unpredictable. Like once you've read X number of books, you can do it. If somebody puts the text in front of you, you can just read it. You'll do maybe you won't do as good as with somebody else, but you'll get it done. If you start a story, it's like there's no guarantees. The thing that comes out might not work at all. Maybe no one will like it. Maybe it doesn't function. Maybe it's busted and my idea was terrible. That's more scary.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
It's also so much more time consuming. I finished narrating a book in 3 or 4 days. Nobody writes a book in 3. Somebody does, but not me.
I feel like Brandon Sanderson does. What the heck happened?
I think he just has nighttime stenography.
That could be. So I follow you on Twitter, and I generally enjoy what you tweet. And a week or two ago, you mentioned something about somebody sent you a really mean email.
They did. It was game development. Yeah. Yeah. That's a common thing in game development if you're public at all.
That's crazy.
Which is another reason I enjoyed switching over to audiobook narration. Game development has a really different expectation from the people that consume it. Some small subset of the people that consume it, right? Book people are mostly really cool. And game people are mostly really cool, but there's a lot of game people and there's a small subset that is not cool. And they're very vocal about how not cool they are. There's also like this different expectation. Like if you put out a book and somebody doesn't like your book, they just give you 1 star or 2 stars or whatever, and they move on with their life. Yeah. They don't demand that you rewrite the book for them. In gaming, if somebody doesn't like something you do, they haunt you and dox you and travel and follow you across message boards, and they demand that you change the game to suit their needs after the fact, because the expectation is that the game is a service and it is something that can respond to their negative feedback and be altered to suit them, which is a totally different mindset than people have about books or audiobooks or anything like that, or movies even. You don't decide that you don't like the last Marvel movie in the Avengers and be like, well, I need you to reshoot the ending for me. That doesn't happen because it's silly.
It shouldn't happen, but you handled it so well. You were very calm and respectful.
It's easier to do when you're not doing the job anymore, too. There's like when you're in the job and you have to go to work tomorrow and still potentially deal with these people and consider them a customer that your livelihood may depend on. You still have to be really nice, but it's like it's more abrasive and it's harder on you. Now, I don't need them as a customer. My life does not depend on them. My livelihood doesn't. So I'm just going to be like, okay, and they apologized.
Oh, okay.
They sent me an apology. I said, I think this is not going to go the way you go, and I posted that on Twitter with them redacted, and it did not go the way that they thought it would go, and so they read it and they apologized.
Yeah.
So it's like that. To me, that felt like a win. Like, okay, I showed you what this is like. I showed you like the impact of this, and maybe you'll think about it differently now. So great.
Yeah. It's a nice learning moment for them, but also really shitty to have opened an email that said that.
Yeah. But like I said, it's not anywhere near as bad as it used to be. And I have a really thick skin at this point from decades doing game development. So if somebody doesn't like a book I do or write, what I write or what I read, I mean, I'm like, oh, that sucks. But it's not world ending for me the way I think it is for a lot of people, because my tolerance had to be jacked so high that I'm calibrated differently at this point. So I want everybody to love my book or my narration or whatever, but if they don't, it's okay.
So I've been on a lot of like LitRPG and game lit and fantasy like subreddits and Facebook groups, and anytime anybody mentions Travis Baldree, there is just love. There's only love.
I mean, somebody will always not like. I get up every day and I think somebody out there hates what I'm going to do today, because somebody does. Somebody just doesn't. They just don't like the sound of your voice, or something. You remind them of their teacher they had that was mean to them. There's nothing you can do about it. Somebody
Yeah.
out there doesn't like you or something you did, and that's okay. Especially in books, because again, they don't haunt you with it. So there's 1 stars. I've got 1 stars. The people have written reviews where they didn't like what I did, and that's okay, because it's one thing.
Yeah. And you produce so much, so much. How do you have time for life?
I don't know. I'm a nerd. I'm pretty optimized about it. Also, I've been trapped in my house for 2 years, so
Yeah.
mostly, or in the deep dark of winter. The world's opening up a little, but the hour game again. I don't want to compare to game development again, but game dev is you work a lot of hours. It's a lot more than 8 hours a day, and I can't work in my booth for more than 5 or 6 hours a day. I physically can't, or my voice gives out. So I have like a hard daily limit on how much I can do. I record almost every day, but even that I can only do for so long before I got to take a break. And so there's just this nice physical limitation. But I don't know. I'm also reasonably efficient, and I'm a nerd, so I have a really streamlined production process. I didn't have the software I needed to produce audio the way I wanted to, so I wrote some and put it in, and I solved problems I needed. It was very helpful to be an engineer. So, that was useful.
That is very handy when you just know how to do that.
So I've got my production timeline pretty fast. So I do 6 to 7 books a month. It just depends on length. And so I want to say that's you probably do 65 to 75 hours of audio a month, more or less. And I have a dedicated proofer who does all of my proofing, and she's incredibly fast. So from starting a book to having final audio is usually like a week and a half to 2 weeks, and then it's done. And at this point, I'm kind of, once you've worked in the ACX system for long enough and done enough books, you kind of get reclassified so that your stuff gets published quickly. So my stuff goes up within 24 hours. So we have a really tight turnaround for audio, and you just do it. And so we managed to chunk a lot out. Not enough, but
What high expectations you have, not enough.
well, I mean, people ask to do stuff, and you try and schedule them. It's kind of like, so there's a big difference between doing audiobooks for indies and doing audiobooks for like a big publishing house, because the big publishing house had the book done a year ago, and they've been assembling all of their media and waiting for their slot and doing all this stuff. But an indie finishes writing it, and tomorrow they put it out. So like the gap between this has been proofread and copy edited and live on Amazon is almost nothing, which means if there is any delay, it matters. So if somebody misses a date, we do a lot of rescheduling, and we're trying to it's like, okay, let's try and get it as close to where you're probably going to be. It's just the nature of the game. It happens, but it also means that it's really, you just have to be very zen about scheduling, because nothing, especially I have discovered 2 years into COVID, everybody just sort of like wore out at once. It's like, yeah, we're not going to be done.
Yeah.
And I stressed about that a lot for the past few months, and I think I've finally passed some threshold where I've sort of sorted things out, and I'm just, we'll just be peaceful about it. It'll all get worked out.
So normally my next question is, what are you working on next? But it sounds like you're working on more in this world, right?
I am. I know what the book is. I know who the characters are, and I know the rough shape of the story. So I'm hoping to start outlining it very shortly. And obviously I've got a bajillion more audiobooks to do. So that's the main thing that's next. I've got 2 chapters left on audiobook that I'm going to read right after this, and then I'll be done working for the day. And yeah, that's what's next.
Well, thank you, Travis, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It was really fun.
If you haven't read or listened to Legends and Lattes, I suggest you purchase a copy and go to your local coffee shop to read it if it's, not covered in COVID. I found myself wanting coffee while listening to it, so that's probably the perfect place to be. As always, thank you for watching and have a great day.
Thank you.